Good morning again.
Good morning.
It's great to see everybody out this morning. I know there's some that are camping and some that are engaged in other ways. Soccer tournaments and various things, I think, where some of our folks are over here. But we're all happy that we could be together for sure. So I've been kind of in the midst of a brief series, started back in June, I guess, where I was fascinated to look at the parables that show up in all three of the synoptic gospels, all three of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I mentioned each time, I think, that there's about 24, I think 24 parables recorded in the synoptic gospels. There's 8 of those that are recorded in more than one. So there's 8 of them that are recorded in at least 2 of the gospels. But of those 8, there's only 3 that are recorded in all 3 of the those synoptic gospels. Those were the parable of the sower, which we looked at in June, the parable of the mustard seed, which we looked at in July, and then today we're going to look at the parable of the tenants. And so the first 2, the parable of the sower and the parable of the mustard seed, both show up fairly early. They show up in what's referred to as the kingdom of heaven discourse in around Matthew 13. The parable of the tenants is recorded later. It's recorded in Matthew 21, which is going to be our primary text today. If you want to open your text to Matthew 21, it's also recorded in Mark 12 and Luke 20. And so this discourse is where Jesus is teaching during that last week or so, that last period of time, shortly before he would be ultimately crucified, during what's referred to as the Passion Week. So Jesus has come to Jerusalem. We've already seen in the text his triumphal entry. He's come into Jerusalem for Passover. The city was absolutely full of people, because the faithful Jews at that time were they were commanded to come to Jerusalem 3 times a year. They would come to Jerusalem for Passover, which was the occasion that we're seeing here. They would also come at Pentecost, so 50 days later, and then again they would come in the fall. They would come for the Feast of Tabernacles. It's estimated that at this time, when Jesus was teaching in Jerusalem, during that around 30 AD or so, that Jerusalem's population was approximately 80,000 people. Probably about 80 to 100,000 people lived in Jerusalem at that time. During Passover week, it's estimated again. I mean, there's not any real accurate way to calculate it, but it's estimated that there would probably be 2 to 3 million people in and around Jerusalem during Passover week. So just kind of for reference, I was looking up populations of towns we might have a better exposure to, like Bowling Green, Kentucky. How many of you have been to Bowling Green? A few of you? Okay. Bowling Green, it's just about 100,000 people in Bowling Green that live in Bowling Green. During Passover week, it would be a little bit like going to Bowling Green while all of Nashville and all of Memphis were visiting Bowling Green. So that'd be kind of weird, wouldn't it? It'd be kind of crowded. And so it was just this massive amount of people there. The excitement level when Jesus is coming in, the excitement level is sky high. I mean, this is like, as excited as, if UT was going to the national championship or something along those lines. The excitement level was high. And why was it high? Is because they had heard that the Messiah, the potential Messiah, was coming to town. He was a contender. He was a contender to be the one. And Jesus, I mean, he's been doing great signs. He's been doing great signs and wonders. The blind people are seeing. The deaf people are hearing. There have been lame people healed, and they're walking around and sharing about their healing. And then just the other day, so to speak, there was out there in Bethany a man named Lazarus was raised after he'd been dead for 4 days. Nobody had heard of that kind of a situation. Jesus was the contender for the Messiahship. He provided bread in the wilderness, like they had seen in the Old Testament of the manna in the wilderness. He provided bread to the 5,000, to the 4,000. He must be the Lord's anointed one. He must be surely the one to overthrow the Romans. And so everybody was out there greeting him. If you've been watching the video series, we saw how they portrayed it. They portrayed him coming in, and they're greeting him with Hosanna to the Son of David. Cries of that. He comes in riding on a donkey, coming as like a king returning triumphantly in peace, just like it was prophesied in the prophet Zechariah, Zechariah 9, that he would come in riding on a donkey, the foal of a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. So they're perhaps legitimately a little confused if, shortly after that excitement and triumphal entry, Jesus comes in and he clears out the money changers and the people selling animals and wares and such in the temple courts. Makes a whip and throws everybody out. But they're not tremendously surprised because he's done this before. John records it back early in his ministry that his zeal for his Father's house had consumed him. Back at the beginning of his ministry as well, and he had already once before cleared out the money changers from the temple courts. That's recorded in John chapter 2. At that time, when he had done it that first time, he was pretty much unknown. Nobody really knew who this Jesus was, and so it didn't cause nearly as big of a stir. Although it did kind of get the ball rolling, and people's attention was on him. And now everybody is watching. Everybody is watching to see what this Jesus will do. Is he a contender for the Messiahship, or is he just an itinerant teacher that's causing a lot of trouble? The priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, they're all trying to figure out what Jesus is going to do also, because they don't want to lose their positions of authority as teachers, as leaders of the temple, as leaders of the community, as supporters of Herod there. It's in this context that Jesus teaches this parable of the tenants. And so let's read from Matthew chapter 21. It will pick up in verse 33 and read through 46. So Jesus says, "Hear another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants and more than the first, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance.' And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" They responded to him. They said to him, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their seasons." Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them, and although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet. So as Jesus was beginning his parable there, he sets it up in a way that they would have definitely recognized. He references that the man planted a vineyard, he put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. That would have clued them in immediately to the fact that he was referencing Isaiah, what we would refer to as Isaiah chapter 5. So I would invite you to keep a hand there in Matthew perhaps, but turn to Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 2. Let's start at verse 1. "Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and he hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes." So they would have recognized that reference to the vineyard with the wine press and the wall and the tower as a clear reference to Isaiah. But then Jesus kind of adapts the parable. In Isaiah 5 there, the vineyard is the house of the Lord. So if you drop down in Isaiah to verse 7, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel." So in Isaiah's reference there, the vineyard is the house of Israel. But Jesus, let's see here. In that vineyard, God had planted choice vines. But the choice vines, they weren't producing the choice grapes that he was expecting, were they? As we read back in verse 2 of Isaiah 5. They were yielding wild grapes. So what were the choice grapes that he was looking for? Well, there again, still in Isaiah chapter 5. "For the vineyard of the Lord," this is verse 7, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold an outcry." So he's looking for justice and righteousness as the fruit in his choice vines, in his vineyard. These are going to be major themes really throughout Isaiah. If you just flip back a page or two in Isaiah to the beginning of this extended song, I guess, Isaiah chapter 1, on down through chapter 5 is a song that's referred to as "Ah, Sinful Nation," and it begins in Isaiah chapter 1. But in verse 16 of chapter 1, verse 16, the writer, or Isaiah, calls the people, "Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." So he's calling for them to plead for the widows and those that are being oppressed. If you drop down to verse 23, they did not bring the justice to the fatherless and the widow's cause. Does not come to them. Your princes and rebels. Sorry, I skipped over. Your princes and rebels and companions of thieves. Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not bring justice to the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them. The justice to the fatherless, the orphans, the widow's cause, the widows were always a population that was at risk because they had no They had no resources. They had no way to support themselves in many cases. And then as if we go on down to verse 27 there in Isaiah 1, Zion shall be redeemed by justice, and those in her who repent by righteousness. So God's looking for, in his people, that desire for justice and righteousness. And he's reminding, Jesus is reminding them of that entire context simply by bringing up the vineyard with a wall, the watchtower, and a winepress. He's calling their mind all of those things about the song in the first 5 chapters of Isaiah. Jesus points his parables squarely at the leaders, though, rather than at the whole of Israel. So, yeah, trying to read my notes. Jesus points it at the leaders rather than the whole vineyard. And he prophesies, Isaiah prophesies in chapter 3, that the Lord will judge the elders and the princes. So that's chapter 3 of Isaiah, verse 14. The Lord will enter into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. The spoil of the poor is in your house. So they've been, the princes and the elders of the people is really who Jesus seems to be emphasizing as the tenants in the vineyard, as he references them in the parable here in Matthew 21. So these prophets that were beaten and killed, these would have been clear references to the hearers as well. Yeah, they would have understood that he was referring to Jeremiah, who was beaten and thrown into a cistern. That's in Jeremiah 37 and 38. They would have understood that there was numerous prophets that had been beaten and killed, and there's numerous references to that in Nehemiah chapter 9, in 2 Chronicles 36, and then also in 2 Chronicles 24. I thought we would just flip over there. In 2 Chronicles 24, verses 19 through 22. Well, I guess let's start in 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verse 15 and 16. That's the first one I marked. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 15 and 16. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. And if you flip back a few pages, 2 Chronicles chapter 24. Chapter 24 and verse 19. Yet he sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. Those testified against them, but they would not pay attention. Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people, and he said to them, Thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you. But they conspired against him, and by the command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. So Jesus, when he's referring to the prophets that were killed and stoned and beaten, he's bringing them back to Jeremiah and to Zechariah and to numerous other prophets that had been treated shamefully by the leaders of the children of Israel. Rather than seeking justice and righteousness, those leaders in the days of the prophets, what were they seeking? They were seeking to gain and grasp for power and control and wealth. That sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? The leaders there in the time of Christ that he's speaking to there in the temple courts, The leaders in the time of Christ, those that are in the immediate context of Matthew 21, they're trying to maintain the status quo as well. They're trying to maintain what they would refer to as a peace. Rome, as we've talked about with Ethan, is they were maintaining a peace through war. And they would keep people in subjection, but there was an element of peace to it. And these leaders were okay with that, apparently. They were trying to maintain that status quo because they enjoyed an element of honor within their culture still. Jesus continues the parable, not with sending yet another prophet, but in verse 37 of Matthew 21, he says, finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. This is one of the occasions where Jesus is making a claim. Jesus is, and they would have clearly understood that he was making the claim to be the Son of God. This would have been quite distressing to some of the leaders there because they believed that God doesn't have a son, that God's son was Israel and Israel alone. But to claim to be the Son of God was to claim equality with God. But here comes the Son asking the tenants to give them the fruit, to give the fruit to the master, to give that justice and righteousness that he demands. But the tenants, they think this is an opportunity when they see the Son. They see it as an opportunity to seize control of the vineyard. They're going to try to maintain control of Israel. They've been able to manage it, and they're pretty happy with the wild grapes that it's producing. Those wild grapes of power, money, earthly honor. So they threw out the son out of the vineyard. They killed him, threw him out of the vineyard, as Jesus says here in verse 39 of his parable. When the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir, come let us kill him and have his inheritance. And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. In a manner of speaking, Jesus was prophesying that he would be killed outside of the city, not in the temple courts like Zechariah, where Zechariah was stoned in the temple courts. But he would be killed outside of the city, on the hill called Calvary, like we sang about a few minutes ago. I love that as he closes the parable there in verse 41, or verse 40, when therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? He puts the question back to them. When he comes, what will he do? It's almost like a parent, that asks the child to kind of pick their punishment. He's like, what should be done to the one who's disobeyed in this way? And they come back with a pretty harsh answer, do they not? Verse 41, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their season. Jesus, he doesn't directly contradict what their assessment of the ruling will be. And that kind of rings in my mind, of Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7, that with the judgment that you render, you will be judged. But he also points them to Psalm 118. The stone that the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And that reads kind of odd to our ears, and it does to my ears, I should say. But to the hearers, Psalm 118, they would have had that right in the top of their mind, because Psalm 118 was part of the Hallel. The Hallel were the songs that they sang at the time of Passover. And we have songs that we sing primarily at Christmas time, right? They had songs that they would sing, primarily at certain times of the year as well. And so Psalm 118, it's actually like Psalm 113 through Psalm 118, are the groups of psalms that we understand to be sung primarily at that time of Passover. And so by quoting Psalm 118 here in verse 22 of Psalm 118, he says, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes." He was trying to remind them not just of that word, those specific words, although he did want to emphasize the stone that the builders had rejected. But he was also reminding them of the entire psalm. We're running a little short on time, so I'm not going to read the whole psalm, but I would encourage you to do so. But I do want to draw your attention to the fact that Psalm 118 begins and ends with, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever." Just from beginning to end of that psalm. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. The psalmist does pray there in verse 20 or so, "This is the gate of the Lord, the righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation." And then it continues, "The stone that the builders have rejected has become the cornerstone." He is our salvation. He's become my salvation. So he follows that up back over in Matthew verse 43. He follows up that reference to Psalm 118, to the stone that the builders rejected. He follows that up with acknowledging that their judgment was at least partially right, that God will take away from them and give to another people, producing the fruits of justice and righteousness, the fruits that he desires in his vineyard. But he also reminds them of the one who falls on this stone we broke into pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush them. So that's the stone that the builders rejected. That again is a reference to Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 14. I'm having you flip back and forth a lot today. I don't really apologize. Chapter 8 and verse 14. "And he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble on it and shall fall and be broken, and they shall be snared and taken." That stone of offense, that stone on which one would fall, that stone is Christ. And that should also remind us of Daniel 2. Daniel 2 and Daniel's vision there, he envisions this great statue, remember? A great statue that's head is gold and chest is silver and midsection is bronze, and feet and legs are iron, and then iron and clay. Well, the stone, not cut by human hands, comes flying in and crushes those feet of iron and clay. Christ destroys the powers of this world, but not through the ways that they were expecting. Not through the overthrow of Rome like they were hoping and expecting, but yet through his death was how he was going to destroy the powers of the world. So was Jesus' message about this parable, was his message only to the Jewish leaders of that day? If so, why did all three of the gospel writers include it? I mean, the Holy Spirit doesn't waste his time or ours. So why did they all put it in there? Well, I think it's because the Spirit led them to, obviously, but also the Spirit wants us to take something from that message as well. So what is the message that we have from this parable? This message is not just that the leaders of Israel in the time of Christ were not behaving appropriately. The message for us is that often we find ourselves playing some role of authority we're placed in those roles where we're stewards of numerous things that don't belong to us. But yet, we can try to seize control of those things. Those could include, our careers, perhaps our families, our time. That's a big one. Our time. It's my time. I gotta have some me time. Our time, our money, perhaps our fellowship. When sometimes we try to seize control of our fellowship. Like we were talking about this morning, sometimes our own will, we try to seize control of that and say, it's mine. God expects us to use all those resources, the resources of our careers and families, of our time and money, fellowship, of our own will. He expects us to use those resources in submission to Him, to pursue justice for the aliens, the orphans, and the widows, to pursue righteousness. What is righteousness? Well, pursue the right relationship between man, between us and others, and between us and God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He calls us to humble ourselves before Him, to seek His face. So I would encourage you, as you read this story of the tenants, this parable of the tenants, to read it with the eyes towards how has Jesus come before me, asking for the fruits of his vineyard. How has He asked me to be an instrument of justice and righteousness? And how are we doing with that? But not to just get downtrodden about it, because His steadfast love does endure forever. So turn to Him. Give your heart to Him. If there are those this morning that have a need, that would like to join together in prayer together, we'd love to come before the Lord together, with you. If there are those that need to humble themselves before God, that need to recognize the need for a Savior and submit to Him in baptism, we'd be happy to help with that as well. Remember, the steadfast love of the Lord endures forever.